Almost 100% of Chinese men say that they will never get married. In a shocking turn that no one saw coming, nearly every man in China has simply stopped pursuing relationships, leaving millions of women facing a harsh reality where Valentine's Day brings no gifts, matchmaking events draw thousands of women but zero men, and the entire dating landscape has flipped upside down. This is not some temporary trend. It is a fundamental shift where men have chosen solitude over the constant demands, financial burdens, and emotional exhaustion that modern relationships have become. And the consequences are hitting hard as women now scramble in a world that no longer revolves around their expectations. Stick around until the end, because what men are saying about never returning to this dynamic will change how you view the future of relationships forever. The situation unfolding in China right now reveals a profound transformation in how men and women interact, one driven by years of accumulated pressures that have finally reached a breaking point. For a long time, society pushed a narrative where men were expected to provide endlessly, to chase, to spend, to compromise their own peace for the sake of partnership, while women held the upper hand in setting terms that grew increasingly one sided. Economic realities have changed everything. With widespread financial strain, high living costs, and a slowdown that affects everyone, men have started doing the math on what relationships actually cost them in time, money, and mental energy. They see that pouring resources into something uncertain often yields nothing but more demands, and they have decided it is no longer worth it. This is not about bitterness or revenge. It is about self preservation and recognizing that true contentment can come from focusing on personal growth, hobbies, friendships, and financial stability instead of chasing approval that never arrives. Consider the numbers that paint a clear picture of this withdrawal. Marriage registrations have fallen dramatically, hitting a record low of just over 6 million couples in recent years, a steep drop from previous decades when the figures were double or more. This decline continues year after year, reflecting not just fewer people tying the knot, but a broader rejection of the institution itself among younger generations. Men, in particular, are stepping back at rates that outpace women, with surveys and reports showing a significant portion choosing to remain single indefinitely. The reasons tie directly to practical concerns. Many earn modest incomes far below the expectations often placed on them for providing homes, cars, and lavish lifestyles. When the average salary struggles to cover basic needs, let alone extravagant gifts or ongoing support, the old model of unilateral provision collapses. Men are prioritizing their own survival and well being, investing in self improvement like fitness, skills, or side pursuits rather than dates that feel like transactions with no guaranteed return. Events across the country tell the same story in vivid detail. Matchmaking gatherings that once balanced genders now attract hundreds or even thousands of women, yet men stay away entirely. In one notable case in a major city, a large scale event drew close to 1,000 women ready to meet potential partners, but not a single man appeared. Organizers and attendees alike expressed surprise and frustration, but the pattern repeats. Women pay fees, dress up, and show up in hope only to face empty chairs on the men's side. These are not isolated incidents. They reflect a deliberate choice by men to avoid environments where they feel judged, pressured, or expected to perform without reciprocity. The absence speaks volumes. Men have learned that showing up often leads to scrutiny over income, status, or willingness to meet high demands, so they opt out altogether, finding fulfillment elsewhere. Holidays that once revolved around romantic gestures now highlight the shift even more starkly. Valentine's Day and similar occasions, including internet driven celebrations, used to see massive spending on flowers, gifts, dinners, and red envelopes. Sales would surge, stores would overflow, and the economy benefited from the ritual exchange. This year, and in recent times, the picture has changed completely. Flower shops report record low sales, with prices dropping because demand has evaporated. Bouquets pile up unsold, turning into waste rather than symbols of affection. Luxury items, fine dining, and related consumer sectors see sharp declines as men redirect their money toward personal needs or simple pleasures like time with friends or hobbies. Women who once counted on these gestures to feel valued now face silence, leading to public expressions of dismay and confusion. The absence of attention forces a confrontation with changed realities where the old assumptions no longer hold. Economic factors play a central role in accelerating this change. Inflation, job insecurity, and rising costs make every expense a calculated decision. Men recognize that spending on dates, gifts, or supporting a partner can quickly drain resources needed for rent, food, transportation, and building a secure future. Surveys indicate a majority of men are actively cutting back on dating related outlays, focusing instead on essentials and self reliance. This is not stinginess, it is pragmatism in tough times. When the promise of mutual support feels replaced by one sided expectations, the incentive to participate fades. Men see that investing in themselves through education, fitness, career advancement, or even leisure yields more reliable rewards than uncertain romantic pursuits. The collapse of what some call the simp economy, where unilateral generosity was the norm, stems directly from this awakening. Men no longer view themselves as obligated to fund lifestyles or egos without equal effort coming back. Cultural influences have compounded the issue over time. Social media and online content often present idealized images of wealth, luxury, and effortless romance, creating unrealistic benchmarks. Women influenced by these portrayals sometimes expect partners to match high standards in income, appearance, and provision, even when their own circumstances do not align symmetrically. This mismatch breeds disillusionment on both sides. Men feel perpetually inadequate or exploited, while women feel disappointed when reality does not match the fantasy. The result is a growing divide where trust erodes and participation drops. Men, seeing the pattern, choose to disengage rather than continue in a system that seems rigged against their peace and progress. Stories from everyday life illustrate the frustration on the ground. Blind dates that once held promise now end with one party walking away when demands become clear. A woman might order extravagantly, expecting the man to cover it without question, only to find herself responsible when he excuses himself and leaves. Such incidents go viral, with public opinion often siding with the man for refusing to be taken advantage of. Restaurants and venues deal with unpaid bills from groups assuming male company would handle costs, leading to embarrassment and mockery online. These moments reinforce the decision for many men to avoid such risks entirely. They prefer solitude or male friendships where interactions feel straightforward and reciprocal, without hidden agendas or financial traps. The broader impact extends beyond personal choices to society as a whole. Fewer relationships mean fewer families, which ties into ongoing demographic concerns that officials have tried to address through incentives and events. Yet the trend persists because the root causes remain unaddressed. Men are not returning to old patterns simply because policies encourage it. They have experienced the cost firsthand and found alternatives that bring more satisfaction. Solitude, when chosen freely, offers clarity, reduced stress, and the ability to direct energy toward meaningful goals. Many report feeling liberated, focused, and content in ways that relationships no longer provide. This shift challenges long held assumptions about what partnership must look like and forces a reevaluation of expectations on all sides. Women facing this new landscape express a range of emotions from anger to anxiety. Some voice concerns about economic survival without dual incomes, especially as independence proves more burdensome than anticipated. Others lament the lack of companionship during difficult times, when support would make a difference. The realization that men are content without pursuing them disrupts the previous dynamic where attention was assumed. Public discussions highlight this tension, with debates over what each gender owes the other in modern times. The conversation reveals deep seated differences in priorities, where one side seeks equity and peace, while the other grapples with adjusted expectations. As this unfolds, the damage feels irreversible to many observers. Men articulate clearly that the exhaustion from constant compromise, emotional labor without return, and financial strain has led them to a point of no return. They describe interactions with women as draining rather than uplifting, where logic meets emotion in ways that leave one side defeated. The decision to walk away stems from a desire for harmony that relationships no longer deliver. Instead, they build lives around self respect, personal achievements, and genuine connections that do not demand sacrifice without balance. This choice resonates widely as more men share similar experiences and affirm that solitude beats ongoing struggle. The path forward remains uncertain, but the message from men is consistent. They have found value in stepping back, and the peace it brings outweighs any pressure to re engage on old terms. Women must navigate this changed terrain, perhaps reflecting on what mutual respect truly requires rather than assuming provision is automatic. The era of one sided dynamics has ended, replaced by individual choices that prioritize well being over obligation. This transformation, born from hard lessons, reshapes not just dating, but the very fabric of social expectations in profound ways. The withdrawal of Chinese men from dating and marriage has created ripples that extend far beyond personal heartbreak or temporary frustration. It exposes structural weaknesses in how modern society has organized expectations around gender roles, economic provision, and emotional labor. For decades, the prevailing message directed at men was clear and unrelenting: provide more, earn more, protect more, sacrifice more, adapt more. The reward promised in return was companionship, affection, family, and social approval. That contract, however, began to feel increasingly unbalanced as economic pressures mounted and cultural narratives shifted. When men started calculating the actual return on their investment of time, money, and psychological energy, the numbers simply did not add up anymore. The cost benefit analysis turned decisively negative, and once that realization settles in, it becomes extremely difficult to unsee. One of the most telling indicators of the shift appears in the sharp decline of what used to be routine romantic consumption. In previous years, major shopping festivals tied to love and relationships generated billions in revenue. Platforms reported explosive growth in categories such as jewelry, cosmetics, luxury handbags, high end dining reservations, overseas travel packages marketed as couple getaways, and premium skincare lines positioned as gifts from devoted partners. Those numbers have contracted dramatically. Retail analysts tracking discretionary spending note that categories traditionally fueled by male romantic expenditure now show consistent double digit declines year over year. The money that once flowed towards signaling commitment now stays in bank accounts, gets directed toward individual hobbies, fitness equipment, professional certifications, cryptocurrency investments, or simply building emergency funds. This redirection is not frivolous. It represents a rational response to an environment where the perceived risks of romantic involvement outweigh the benefits by a wide margin. Men describe the change in language that emphasizes clarity over anger. They speak of reclaiming control over their calendars, their finances, and their mental bandwidth. Many say they no longer experience the low grade anxiety that used to accompany every interaction with a potential partner. Questions that once loomed large: will she respect my boundaries? Will expenses spiral unexpectedly? Will criticism arrive disguised as feedback? Will emotional support flow only one way? Have been replaced by the calm certainty of solitude. That calm is addictive. Once a man experiences weeks or months without the background hum of relational tension, returning to the old dynamic feels almost physically uncomfortable, like stepping back into a room filled with constant low level noise after learning what real quiet sounds like. This preference for quiet extends into daily routines. Men report sleeping better, eating more consistently, exercising with greater regularity, reading more books, learning new languages, mastering instruments, traveling alone or with male friends, and pursuing side projects that previously stayed on the back burner because dating demanded so much attention. The cumulative effect is measurable improvement in physical health, financial position, and overall life satisfaction scores in anonymous surveys targeting young urban males. These improvements reinforce the decision to stay out of the dating market. Positive reinforcement loops form quickly when choices produce tangible gains rather than endless negotiation. Meanwhile, the public conversation in China has taken on a noticeably different tone. State media and official channels initially framed falling marriage and birth rates as a demographic challenge requiring policy intervention. Incentives appeared in various forms: housing subsidies for newlyweds, extended maternity leave, cash bonuses for second and third children, tax breaks tied to family formation. Participation rates, however, remained stubbornly low. The reason is straightforward: incentives address symptoms rather than root causes. When the core objection is not financial hardship alone, but a fundamental distrust in the fairness and sustainability of the relationship model itself, no amount of subsidy can restore confidence. Men have concluded that the relational environment has become too adversarial, too extractive, and too emotionally taxing to justify re entry even with external support. Women have responded to this reality in varied ways. Some express open frustration and bewilderment, posting content that questions why men have suddenly become so unwilling to engage. Others adopt a more introspective approach, examining whether past behaviors contributed to the current standoff. A smaller but growing segment has begun openly advocating for mutual accountability, arguing that both genders need to recalibrate expectations if partnership is to remain viable. These voices tend to receive mixed reactions. Traditionalists accuse them of conceding too much ground, while pragmatists praise the honesty as necessary for any possible reconciliation. The debate itself reveals how deeply entrenched the previous imbalance had become. Simply suggesting that compromise should run in both directions can spark heated arguments, which in turn reinforces the decision many men have already made to avoid those arguments entirely. Another layer of complexity emerges when examining generational differences within China itself. Older cohorts still carry memories of a time when marriage was near universal and socially enforced through family pressure, workplace expectations, and community norms. Younger men, particularly those born after the turn of the century, grew up in a radically different media environment. They consumed global content that showcased alternative lifestyles: digital nomads, minimalist living, voluntary celibacy movements, high earning single men enjoying freedom, MG Tao discussions translated into Mandarin, red pill forums, and viral videos critiquing hypergamy and entitlement. These ideas circulated rapidly through domestic platforms despite moderation efforts. Exposure created a feedback loop. Men saw their private frustrations reflected and validated in content created thousands of miles away, which reduced feelings of isolation and increased confidence in the choice to disengage. The same platforms also amplified stories of men who entered relationships under traditional expectations only to face financial ruin, emotional manipulation, false accusations, or sudden abandonment after significant investment. These cautionary tales function as modern folklore, passed along in group chats, comment sections, and short form videos. Each story adds another brick to the wall of reluctance. When enough men share similar experiences, collective behavior shifts from individual caution to widespread withdrawal. Critical mass is reached, and the dating market tips irreversibly. Economic modeling supports the permanence of this shift. Relationship formation carries high upfront and ongoing costs in urban China. Housing remains the single largest barrier. Even with government efforts to cool property prices, ownership expectations persist in many social circles. A man who cannot realistically afford a home within a reasonable time frame often opts out of dating rather than endure repeated rejection based on that single criterion. Add car ownership, wedding expenses, bride price traditions in certain regions, ongoing financial support for a partner who may earn less or choose not to work after children, and the total burden becomes prohibitive for the median earner. When the probability of a positive long term outcome feels low, rational actors minimize exposure to that risk. Women, in turn, face a mirror image dilemma. Many who once viewed economic independence as liberation now confront the limits of that independence under current conditions. Rent, utilities, healthcare, transportation, food, clothing, and personal maintenance expenses accumulate quickly without dual income buffering. The boss babe narrative that dominated social feeds for years promised fulfillment through career success alone, but reality has proven harsher. Layoffs, wage stagnation, long working hours, and burnout have left a significant portion questioning whether solo living is truly sustainable long term. The desire for partnership returns, yet it collides with the reality that the men who once lined up to provide have left the building. This collision produces visible tension in public spaces. Cafes, bookstores, gyms, and co working areas that used to serve as informal dating venues now feel noticeably gender segregated. Men cluster in groups or occupy spaces alone with headphones on, signaling unavailability. Women often appear in larger groups, creating a buffer against approaching strangers. The organic mixed gender mingling that once happened naturally has largely vanished. Social friction increases because the old scripts no longer apply, yet new ones have not fully formed. Everyone navigates uncertainty, but men appear more comfortable with that uncertainty because they have already made their choice. Psychological research conducted in recent years adds another dimension. Studies examining male well being in East Asian urban centers consistently show higher reported life satisfaction among single men compared with their partner counterparts when controlling for income and education. The gap widens when researchers factor in perceived autonomy and stress levels. Partnered men frequently report higher cortisol, disrupted sleep patterns, and greater feelings of obligation, while single men describe greater freedom to pursue intrinsic goals. These findings challenge the long standing cultural assumption that partnership is inherently protective for mental health. For many men, the data confirms what they already feel intuitively. Solitude, when intentional, delivers more peace than compromise under duress. The refusal to return also stems from a growing awareness of leverage dynamics. Men recognize that traditional courtship granted women disproportionate power to accept or reject offers while bearing minimal downside risk. Rejection carried little cost for the rejecting party, but carried significant emotional and social cost for the rejected party. Over time, that asymmetry bred resentment. When men realized they could remove themselves from the game entirely, they gained ultimate leverage. By refusing to play, they neutralized the power imbalance. No amount of shaming, pleading, policy nudging, or cultural nostalgia can force participation once exit becomes the preferable option. Women who attempt to reattract men using old tactics, heightened beauty standards, luxury displays, public complaints about male behavior, often find those tactics backfire. The audience has changed. Men no longer consume the same content with the same gullibility. They scroll past performative displays, recognizing them as marketing rather than genuine invitations to mutual respect. Authenticity, humility, and demonstrated reciprocity now carry far more weight in whatever small segment of the market remains active. The bar has risen dramatically, and many women find themselves unprepared for the new criteria. Demographic projections paint a sobering long term picture. Continued decline in marriage and fertility rates points toward an aging population with fewer workers supporting a larger retiree base. Economists warn of shrinking consumer markets, strained pension systems, and reduced innovation driven by smaller cohorts of young people. Policymakers debate solutions ranging from immigration to artificial intelligence automation to aggressive family incentives, yet none directly address the motivational crisis at the heart of the trend. Until trust and fairness are restored at the interpersonal level, macro level fixes will likely yield marginal results at best. Men articulate their stance with increasing consistency across interviews, forums, and anonymous surveys. The common thread is finality. They describe the decision as irreversible, not out of spite, but out of self protection. Having tasted life without chronic relational stress, they see no compelling reason to reintroduce it. The peace they have found outweighs the promise of companionship that comes bundled with conditions they no longer accept. This stance represents a cultural inflection point. It signals the end of one relational paradigm and the uncertain beginning of another. The scale of this withdrawal becomes even clearer when examining specific urban centers where the phenomenon first gained momentum and then spread outward like wildfire through digital networks. In cities like Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou, the average age of first marriage for men has climbed past 32 and continues rising steadily, while the share of never married men in their late 20s now exceeds 40% in many professional cohorts. These are not fringe statistics pulled from obscure surveys. Government census data, university research institutes, and private demographic firms all converge on the same trend line. The acceleration happened fastest among men holding college degrees or working in technology, finance, engineering, creative industries, or logistics, precisely the groups that once formed the backbone of the urban marriage market. These men possess enough earning power to have been considered desirable under the old rules, yet they are the ones most decisively opting out. Why this particular demographic leads the exodus deserves close attention. Higher education and professional success expose men to global ideas faster and more thoroughly than previous generations experienced. They read English language forums, follow international financial independence communities, watch long form content dissecting relationship economics, and participate in private WeChat groups where members share salary data, living expenses, dating horror stories, and post breakup financial audits. The information asymmetry that once protected traditional expectations has collapsed. Men now possess detailed knowledge of what relationships actually cost versus what they deliver, and that knowledge travels at the speed of fiber optic cable. Once the spreadsheet mindset takes hold, once a man starts viewing courtship as a high risk, low yield investment portfolio, the emotional appeals that used to work lose nearly all potency. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Another critical factor is the transformation of housing as a prerequisite for partnership. In first tier cities, the median price to income ratio for apartments hovers between 25 and 40 times annual household earnings, depending on the district. Even with parental assistance, which remains common, the burden frequently falls heaviest on the groom's side due to lingering cultural norms around male provision. Many men in their mid to late 20s look at the arithmetic and conclude that tying themselves to a 30-year mortgage before age 35, while simultaneously funding wedding banquets, honeymoons, and ongoing lifestyle maintenance for two people represents an unacceptable leverage position. The alternative, renting indefinitely, saving aggressively, investing in index funds or skill development, and preserving geographic mobility, begins to appear not just viable, but superior. When homeownership shifts from a shared life goal to a unilateral financial trap, the incentive structure flips permanently. This financial realism dovetails with a broader reevaluation of risk exposure in intimate relationships. Men increasingly cite three specific categories of downside that feel intolerable. First is legal and financial risk in the event of dissolution. Although divorce laws have evolved and courts have become somewhat more balanced in recent adjudication patterns, the memory of high profile cases involving asset division, alimony claims, and child support obligations lingers. Second is reputational risk amplified by social media. A single accusation, whether substantiated or not, can destroy years of career progress in competitive industries where networks matter enormously. Third is opportunity cost. Time spent dating, maintaining a relationship, or recovering from a breakup represents hours that could have been invested in side businesses, certifications, language fluency, physical conditioning, or building social capital with male peers who offer straightforward reciprocity. When men run these calculations honestly, solitude frequently emerges as the dominant strategy. The emotional architecture of modern Chinese courtship has also shifted in ways that discourage participation. Traditional courtship scripts allowed a certain predictability: pursuit, courtship gifts, formal introduction to families, engagement, marriage. Contemporary patterns feel chaotic and adversarial by comparison. Dates frequently involve background checks conducted through mutual acquaintances or online sleuthing before any meeting occurs. Conversations turn into subtle interrogations about income brackets, property deeds, vehicle ownership, parental occupations, and future earning trajectories. Men report feeling reduced to walking resumes rather than individuals with personalities, humor, or intrinsic value. When every interaction carries the subtext of performance review, genuine connection becomes almost impossible. The atmosphere of evaluation, rather than mutual discovery, pushes men toward environments where judgment is absent. Solo gym sessions, gaming communities, hiking groups, coding meetups, or quiet evenings reading in coffee shops without pressure to impress anyone. Women who remain active in the dating space often adopt strategies that inadvertently accelerate the withdrawal. Some double down on visible markers of status: designer clothing, frequent travel photos, luxury dining check ins, and curated social media feeds emphasizing independence and high value living. The intention is to signal selectivity and therefore desirability. The actual effect is frequently the opposite. Men interpret these displays as evidence of elevated expectations rather than invitations to partnership. The louder the broadcast of self sufficiency and luxury tastes, the more men conclude that participation would require matching or exceeding that lifestyle at considerable personal cost. A quiet but growing consensus has formed among men that genuine interest from women now arrives almost exclusively from those who have already lowered material demands and demonstrated willingness to contribute equally to household economics and emotional labor. Unfortunately, that subset appears smaller with each passing year. Public backlash against male disengagement has produced its own feedback loop. Media segments, short videos, and opinion columns frequently label the trend as selfish, immature, unpatriotic, or symptomatic of weak character. Such framing backfires consistently. Shaming tactics that once carried social weight now provoke defiance or indifference. Men respond by pointing to the same media ecosystem that spent years elevating female hypergamy, mocking average earners, celebrating singlehood for women, and ridiculing men who failed to meet escalating standards. The argument runs that if society spent 2 decades normalizing the idea that men must continuously level up while women remain inherently valuable regardless of behavior, then men can hardly be blamed for accepting the premise and opting out of a rigged contest. The rhetorical move strips moral leverage from critics and reinforces the decision to remain single. One particularly revealing development is the emergence of male only social and economic ecosystems. Private WeChat groups dedicated to financial independence, minimalist living, career advancement, fitness progress, travel hacking, and hobby cultivation have grown into robust parallel communities. Members share salary negotiation scripts, investment portfolios, workout routines, book recommendations, and stories of escaping toxic dating dynamics. These spaces provide validation, practical advice, and camaraderie without any requirement to perform masculinity for female approval. The sense of belonging and mutual support rivals or exceeds what many men previously sought in romantic partnerships. When a man can satisfy needs for connection, achievement, and purpose entirely within same sex networks, the marginal utility of adding a romantic partner drops close to zero. At the same time, female only spaces have proliferated in parallel, often focused on career acceleration, beauty routines, travel, luxury consumption, and mutual encouragement to remain single until ideal conditions materialize. The two ecosystems increasingly resemble parallel universes with minimal crossover. Mixed gender public spaces feel like neutral zones where cautious distance is maintained. The result is a de facto gender segregation that would have seemed unimaginable 20 years ago. Cafes, once filled with couples, now host segregated tables. Parks see men jogging or playing basketball on one side while women walk in groups or practice Tai Chi on the other. The organic social mixing that historically facilitated pair bonding has eroded to the point that younger adults must actively seek engineered environments, speed dating events, paid matchmaking services, or heavily moderated apps if they wish to interact across gender lines at all. This separation carries downstream consequences for everything from consumer behavior to urban planning. Retailers that once thrived on couple oriented spending now pivot toward individual indulgence categories: high end, single serve meals, premium personal grooming products, solo travel packages, gaming peripherals, collectible merchandise, and subscription services tailored to solitary lifestyles. Real estate developers notice rising demand for smaller, well located one bedroom or studio units rather than family sized apartments. City planners debate redesigning public spaces to accommodate single centric leisure rather than couple oriented romance. The built environment slowly begins to reflect the new demographic reality. Perhaps the most profound change lies in the shifting definition of success itself. For previous generations, success meant achieving stable employment, marriage by a certain age, home ownership, and children. Today, many young men define success as financial independence, physical vitality, intellectual curiosity, deep friendships, freedom of movement, and absence of chronic stress. Marriage and children no longer rank as essential milestones. They appear instead as optional high risk ventures that may or may not align with core priorities. When an entire generation redefines what constitutes a life well lived, cultural institutions built around the old definition lose legitimacy. Weddings become niche ceremonies rather than universal rites of passage. Family reunion pressure loses force when adult children can credibly respond that they are already living fulfilling lives without following the prescribed path. Women confronting this new landscape face difficult choices. Some attempt to re enter the market by signaling lower expectations, posting content about valuing personality over income, expressing willingness to split bills, highlighting domestic skills, or emphasizing emotional supportiveness. These efforts receive sporadic positive attention, but rarely reverse the broader trend. Trust has eroded too deeply. Men who have internalized the lesson that promises can change after commitment are slow to believe new messaging. Others in the female cohort pivot toward careerism with even greater intensity, seeking fulfillment in professional achievement, creative pursuits, or sisterhood bonds. A third group explores international dating markets, traveling to Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, or Latin America in search of partners perceived as less influenced by local cultural shifts. Each path reflects adaptation to a reality where traditional domestic partnership has become statistically improbable for large segments of the population. The cumulative weight of these adaptations points toward a society that is structurally reorganizing itself around singlehood as the default rather than the exception. Fertility rates continue sliding toward levels that trigger long term population contraction. Pension systems face mounting pressure. Labor markets anticipate chronic shortages in certain sectors. Innovation cycles may slow as risk averse younger cohorts prioritize stability over entrepreneurship. Yet, within this macro level strain, millions of individuals report elevated personal contentment. The paradox is stark. Society as a whole faces formidable challenges, while the men who drove the shift describe their daily lives as calmer, freer, and more purposeful than at any previous point. This tension between collective demographic crisis and individual psychological gain lies at the heart of the current impasse. Policymakers propose ever larger carrots, extended parental leave, housing lotteries for families, direct cash transfers, tax restructuring, but the sticks remain conspicuously absent. No serious proposal has emerged to penalize prolonged singlehood because such measures would likely accelerate the exodus rather than reverse it. The state finds itself in the uncomfortable position of needing behaviors it cannot compel and cannot purchase at scale. The market of intimate relationships has cleared at a price point that leaves millions of women priced out and millions of men unwilling to sell. Men who articulate their position in public forums or private conversations emphasize one consistent theme. The decision was not made lightly. It followed years of trying, adjusting, compromising, failing, recovering, and trying again, only to encounter the same structural disincentives. Eventually, the pattern became undeniable. Participation rewarded effort with diminishing returns, while exit rewarded effort with compounding gains. Once that asymmetry crystallized, retreat became rational, then habitual, then preferable. The longer men remain outside the system, the higher the psychological barrier to reentry becomes. Habits of self reliance strengthen. Social needs find alternative outlets. Emotional resilience increases. The perceived cost of reacclimating to relational volatility grows prohibitive. This dynamic suggests that the current stasis may harden into permanence. Restoration of balanced partnership would require simultaneous shifts on multiple fronts. Cultural narratives that reward reciprocity rather than unilateral provision, economic conditions that make dual income households the norm rather than the aspiration, legal frameworks perceived as equitable by both parties, media portrayals that humanize men rather than caricature them, and above all, a generational willingness to forgive past imbalances and rebuild trust from near zero. No single policy lever pulls all those strings at once. The timeline for meaningful reversal stretches beyond the lifetime of anyone currently shaping the conversation. In the interim, men continue walking away, not as a protest march, but as quiet individual choices repeated millions of times until the aggregate effect reshapes society itself. They build lives that prioritize internal peace over external validation. They invest in bodies, minds, and bank accounts rather than romantic prospects. They find community and friendships forged through shared interests rather than shared domestic burdens. And they report with striking consistency that the solitude they once feared has become the foundation of a genuine contentment. The transformation now reaches into the most intimate corners of daily decision making, where even small habits reveal the depth of this cultural pivot. Men who once automatically swiped through dating apps during commutes or lunch breaks have deleted the icons entirely, reporting that the mental space freed up feels like recovering from a low grade addiction. Notifications that used to trigger dopamine spikes now register as irrelevant noise. Weekend plans that revolved around impressing someone new have been replaced with structured routines built around personal benchmarks, hitting new personal records in the gym, completing online courses that advance careers, organizing group trips with longtime friends, or simply enjoying uninterrupted hours pursuing passions that were previously sidelined. These routines are not escapes. They are deliberate architectures designed to maximize control and minimize vulnerability. This shift in temporal allocation carries measurable economic weight. Disposable income that previously leaked into dinners, gifts, taxi rides home after late night dates, weekend getaways, and spontaneous purchases meant to maintain interest now accumulates in savings accounts, brokerage portfolios, or tangible assets like high quality audio equipment, professional grade cameras, custom bicycles, or even small real estate down payments for future solo living. Financial literacy channels targeted at young Chinese men have exploded in popularity, with creators breaking down compound interest math, tax optimization strategies, side hustle scaling, and early retirement projections. The content resonates because it aligns perfectly with the newfound priority of self capitalization over relational expenditure. When a man sees projections showing that consistent monthly investments at his current age could yield multi million yuan net worth by 50, while dating expenses compound in the opposite direction, the choice crystallizes further. The psychological literature emerging from Chinese universities and private research firms reinforces what men report anecdotally. Longitudinal studies tracking cohorts of urban males aged 25 to 35 show declining attachment anxiety and rising secure attachment scores among those who have remained single for 24 months or longer. The pattern suggests that prolonged voluntary singlehood functions as a kind of exposure therapy against fear of abandonment or rejection. Without the constant relational feedback loop of approval seeking, men recalibrate their self worth to internal rather than external metrics. Self esteem becomes anchored in competence, discipline, and progress rather than validation from a partner. This internal locus of control appears highly protective against burnout, depression, and decision fatigue, outcomes that partnered men in the same income brackets report at higher rates. Conversely, partnered men frequently describe a phenomenon researchers term relational cognitive load. Every day involves dozens of micro decisions filtered through the lens of how a partner might perceive or react to them. Clothing choices, tone of voice in messages, allocation of free time, even food orders at restaurants become negotiations rather than autonomous acts. Over years, the cumulative toll manifests as chronic low level exhaustion that mimics mild adrenal fatigue. Single men who have exited that loop describe the relief as physical. They stand taller, breathe deeper, move with less tension. Sleep quality improves dramatically when bedtime no longer involves emotional debriefs or anticipatory conflict resolution. The body keeps score, and solitude is winning on points. Women navigating the same environment encounter a different calculus. Many who built identities around career acceleration and visible independence now confront the reality that solo economic security remains fragile in an economy marked by unpredictable layoffs, rising healthcare costs, and stagnant real wages for non elite roles. The Instagram friendly narrative of thriving alone often masks quiet anxiety about long term solvency, especially as peers begin announcing engagements or pregnancies while their own timelines stretch indefinitely. Some respond by lowering visibility of luxury consumption, posting more about home cooked meals, fitness journeys without designer athleisure, or genuine career struggles rather than curated wins. The pivot reflects strategic adaptation, signaling approachability and groundedness rather than unattainability. Yet the signaling often arrives too late for the men who have already internalized skepticism. Trust deficits created over years do not dissolve overnight. A woman who spent her mid 20s openly ranking men by income percentiles or mocking those unable to afford frequent overseas travel cannot simply rebrand as humble and reciprocal without facing scrutiny. Screenshots circulate, old posts resurface, the internet remembers. Men who once tolerated or ignored such behavior now view it as red flags waving in formation. The forgiveness window has narrowed to near zero for many. They prefer the clean slate of strangers met through shared hobbies over the emotional baggage carried by someone whose public persona once celebrated hypergamous preferences. This memory effect extends to collective male consciousness through digital archives. Forums preserve threads from 5 or 10 years ago where women boasted about turning down engineers earning six-figure salaries because the man lacked a luxury vehicle or international travel history. Those threads are still linked, quoted, and referenced whenever new waves of women express confusion about male withdrawal. The archive functions as a permanent ledger of expectations that were once normalized but are now rejected outright. It serves as both deterrent and justification. Deterrent because men see the pattern and refuse to participate. Justification because it validates the decision to disengage as rational rather than spiteful. Another dimension emerges in the realm of sexual economics. The traditional bargain, male provision in exchange for female exclusivity and affection, has fractured irreparably in many minds. Pornography consumption among young Chinese men has risen sharply, not merely as escapism, but as a low risk, high control alternative to pursuit. High quality content, interactive platforms, and virtual reality options deliver gratification without negotiation, rejection, or financial outlay beyond a subscription fee. For men who view partnered sex as increasingly entangled with performance pressure, emotional labor, and post coital expectations, the solo alternative appears cleaner and more predictable. The preference is not framed as ideal, but as pragmatic given current market conditions. Simultaneously, the weaponization of intimacy as leverage has left lasting scars. Stories circulate of men coerced into expensive gifts or financial support under threat of withheld affection, only to face abrupt endings once the desired outcome was secured. These narratives, whether fully accurate or exaggerated in retelling, accumulate into a shared cautionary framework. Men internalize the lesson that sexual access can be strategically deployed to extract resources, making even consensual encounters feel like potential transactions. The perceived liability, legal, financial, reputational, outweighs the momentary pleasure for a growing segment. Celibacy by choice becomes normalized when the alternative carries too many hidden costs. Urban infrastructure subtly adapts to the new reality. Developers market micro apartments with premium single occupancy features, compact but luxurious kitchens, built in home office nooks, high speed internet optimized for streaming and gaming, soundproofing for uninterrupted focus, and rooftop gyms designed for solo workouts. Co-living spaces that once emphasized mixed gender socializing now highlight privacy pods, individual bathrooms, and quiet zones. The physical environment begins to reward solitary living rather than penalize it through cramped, family-oriented designs. Retail follows suit. Single-serve meal kits proliferate. High-end personal care brands target male consumers directly with campaigns emphasizing self-respect and independence rather than attractiveness to women. The market listens to where money flows, and money flows towards self-directed lives. Education systems quietly adjust as well. University career counselors report more young men expressing interest in overseas opportunities, remote work, digital nomadism, or early retirement planning rather than stable domestic employment geared toward family support. Curricula in personal finance electives see enrollment spikes, while family studies courses experience declining interest among male students. The next generation absorbs the lesson early. Build individual security first, relational security second, if at all. Rural to urban migration patterns add another layer. Young men who move to cities for opportunity often carry traditional expectations of eventual marriage and family. After a decade of exposure to urban dating dynamics, many choose to return to hometowns or smaller cities where living costs are lower, social pressure is lighter, and solitude feels less isolating. They purchase modest properties, maintain remote jobs, and cultivate local friendships without the constant background hum of hypergamous competition. The reverse migration softens some demographic pressure on megacities while reinforcing singlehood as a viable lifestyle across geographic divides. Women who pursue international partnerships encounter mixed outcomes. Platforms facilitating connections with men in Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, Africa, or Latin America see rising female registrations from China. Some find partners who value their education, work ethic, and cultural background. Others face cultural mismatches, language barriers, or partners whose expectations mirror the very dynamics Chinese men have rejected. Success stories exist, but failure stories spread faster. cooling enthusiasm for the strategy among peers. The global search for partnership becomes one option among many rather than a silver bullet. Meanwhile, men experiment with polysocial models that satisfy emotional needs without romantic entanglement. Brotherhood style living arrangements emerge. Groups of 4 to 6 men sharing larger apartments, splitting rent, cooking in rotation, organizing fitness challenges, and providing mutual accountability for career and health goals. These arrangements offer companionship, shared laughter, practical support during illness or job loss, and zero romantic risk. The model borrows from historical precedents, military units, monastic communities, university dorms, while updating for modern urban economics. Participants report satisfaction levels comparable to or exceeding those of married peers without the associated stressors. Philosophical undercurrents deepen the shift. Translations of Stoic texts, Buddhist writings on detachment, and contemporary minimalist manifestos circulate widely in Mandarin. Concepts like voluntary simplicity, digital minimalism, and hedonic adaptation resonate strongly with men who feel they were sold a vision of happiness through consumption and partnership that never materialized. The rejection of that vision is framed as enlightenment rather than defeat. Walking away becomes an act of wisdom, choosing present contentment over deferred promises. The longer this pattern holds, the more it normalizes. Younger brothers observe older siblings thriving in solitude and imitate the model. High school boys discuss financial independence as casually as previous generations discussed college entrance exams. The cultural transmission line shifts from marriage as default to singlehood as valid option, perhaps even singlehood as preferred. Once a critical mass accepts the new default, reversing course requires not just incentives, but a fundamental rewrite of the social script. That rewrite has not yet begun in earnest. Policymakers continue searching for levers that do not exist. Propaganda campaigns promoting family values reach audiences already inoculated against them. Subsidies increase, yet marriage registrations barely budge. The disconnect grows because the problem is motivational rather than material. Men are not refusing partnership because they cannot afford it. Many could afford modest family life if they chose it. They refuse because the relational environment feels hostile to their dignity, autonomy, and long term flourishing. Until that environment changes at the level of everyday interactions, mutual respect, shared labor, emotional reciprocity, absence of unilateral entitlement, the motivational barrier remains immovable. In private conversations, men articulate a quiet certainty. They have run the experiment. They tried the conventional path, adjusted, compromised, endured, and ultimately exited. The data from their own lives confirms that solitude delivers higher utility than the alternative. No amount of external pressure can override lived experience. The decision is final, not because of anger, but because of clarity. They have seen the view from both sides of the river and chosen the bank where peace resides. The detachment has now matured into a fully articulated philosophy among many men who once participated in the conventional dating script. They describe the process as a gradual awakening rather than a sudden revolt. It began with small observations that accumulated quietly over years. A pattern of dates where conversations circled endlessly around the woman's preferences while his own remained unasked. Financial ledgers showing consistent outflows with no corresponding inflows of support or appreciation. Nights spent replaying interactions in search of where things went wrong, only to realize the structure itself was designed to keep him chasing. Each realization chipped away at the old belief system until nothing remained to hold it together. What replaced it was not hatred, but indifference, the calm certainty that life functions better without the added variable of unequal partnership. This indifference manifests in subtle but consistent behavioral changes that collectively reshape social norms. Men no longer feel compelled to initiate contact after meeting someone interesting. They let silence stretch without anxiety. When women reach out first, responses arrive days later, or not at all if the initial impression suggests familiar patterns of expectation. The old urgency to secure attention has evaporated because attention no longer translates into meaningful reward. Men have recalibrated their value hierarchy so that personal sovereignty sits at the top, followed by career momentum, physical capability, intellectual depth, and male camaraderie. Romantic pursuit occupies a distant position, treated as an optional luxury rather than a core requirement for fulfillment. The recalibration extends to how men evaluate potential partners when rare curiosity does arise. The criteria have narrowed dramatically and become non negotiable. Reciprocity now ranks above beauty or status. A woman who splits bills without comment, shows genuine interest in his pursuits, maintains emotional stability during disagreements, and respects his boundaries receives consideration. Demonstrated entitlement, passive aggressive communication, or insistence on traditional provider roles eliminates her from contention immediately. This filtering happens quickly and without apology because men understand the cost of overlooking red flags. Past tolerance taught them that small concessions grow into large obligations. They now enforce zero tolerance policies on behaviors they once excused in the name of hope or attraction. Women who encounter this new filter often react with indignation or confusion. They point to their education, career achievements, physical fitness, or social popularity as proof of high value, expecting those attributes to unlock male interest automatically. The disconnect arises because men no longer assign value using the same scorecard. Credentials impress less than character. Income parity matters more than luxury displays. Emotional consistency outweighs with intermittent affection. When women present themselves using metrics that once guaranteed attention, Instagram aesthetics, branded lifestyles, lists of accomplishments, they frequently meet polite disinterest or outright withdrawal. The mismatch reveals how thoroughly the old incentive structure has collapsed. Conversations in male dominated online spaces have evolved into sophisticated dissections of these mismatches. Men share anonymized chat logs, date receipts, post date analyses, and long term relationship postmortems with clinical precision. Common conclusions emerge across thousands of independent accounts. Arguments rarely resolve through logic because one party prioritizes emotional validation while the other seeks factual alignment. Compromise feels asymmetrical when one side views concessions as generosity and the other views them as baseline fairness. Sexual dynamics shift toward obligation rather than mutual desire when access becomes conditional on material provision or behavioral compliance. These observations crystallize into shared axioms that guide future decisions. Never invest more than you can afford to lose. Never tolerate disrespect in exchange for affection. Never outsource self worth to external approval. The axioms produce behavioral consistency that younger men absorb almost osmotically. Boys in their late teens and early 20s now enter adulthood already inoculated against many of the illusions that ensnared previous cohorts. They watch older brothers, cousins, or online mentors live comfortably single and conclude that the advertised path, study hard, earn well, marry well, provide endlessly, represents a poor trade. Social media algorithms feed them content reinforcing this conclusion. Videos of men traveling alone, building wealth, mastering skills, enjoying freedom, contrasted against clips of men trapped in unhappy marriages or exploitative dating cycles. The contrast imprints early and deeply. By the time these young men reach dating age, many have already decided that partnership must clear an extraordinarily high bar or remain unnecessary. This generational handoff accelerates the trend's permanence. Parents who once assumed grandchildren would arrive by their 50s now confront the likelihood that their sons will remain childless by choice. Family gatherings feature fewer wedding announcements and more discussions of solo travel plans, new business ventures, or fitness milestones. Pressure to marry weakens when adult children can point to thriving single lives as evidence that the traditional timeline no longer applies. Some parents adapt by redirecting expectations toward career success or personal happiness. Others persist in traditional nagging only to meet calm but firm boundaries. The generational rift widens, but the younger side holds the stronger position because they control their own futures. Economic modeling of lifetime outcomes further entrenches the choice. Actuarial style projections circulated in financial communities compare two parallel paths. Path A: traditional marriage with average wedding costs, housing down payment skewed toward groom, ongoing lifestyle support, potential divorce with asset division, child rearing expenses, and reduced personal savings rate. Path B: lifelong singlehood with aggressive saving, compound growth, geographic flexibility, no dependence, lower stress related healthcare costs, and full control over discretionary spending. When reasonable assumptions are plugged in, median urban salaries, realistic divorce probabilities, average child costs, historical market returns, Path B frequently yields 3 to 5 times higher net worth at retirement age, alongside higher reported life satisfaction. The numbers do not lie, and men increasingly trust numbers over cultural promises. Trust in data extends to health metrics as well. Single men track biomarkers showing lower inflammation, better testosterone profiles, reduced cortisol, stronger immune response, and faster recovery from physical stress compared with married counterparts in similar professions. The differences emerge most clearly in men over 30 who have maintained consistent fitness and sleep habits without relational disruption. Chronic relationship stress functions as a silent toxin that erodes physical resilience over decades. By avoiding that toxin, many men achieve measurable longevity advantages, advantages they intend to enjoy rather than sacrifice. The enjoyment takes concrete form in pursuits that were once deferred indefinitely. Men in their 30s now backpack through Southeast Asia for months at a time, live in Bali co working compounds, learn Muay Thai in Thailand, study Mandarin in Taiwan immersion programs, build e commerce businesses from laptops in Chiang Mai, or simply rent mountain cabins for solo writing retreats. These experiences were previously framed as irresponsible distractions from settling down. Now they are celebrated as investments in self actualization. The stories shared online inspire emulation rather than judgment. A man returning from a 6 month motorcycle journey across Yunnan posts photos of remote villages and sunrise vistas. Comments flood in with congratulations rather than questions about when he will marry. Women observing this freedom from the sidelines experience a complex mix of emotions. Envy surfaces when peers post images of unencumbered adventure. Resentment appears when men openly state that female companionship no longer ranks high enough to justify the trade offs. Grief emerges for the loss of assumed future roles: wife, mother, partner that once defined identity. Some channel these feelings into personal reinvention, launching businesses, pursuing advanced degrees, relocating to cities with better gender balances, or joining expat communities abroad. Others double down on criticism of male withdrawal, framing it as immaturity or fear of responsibility. The criticism rarely persuades because it arrives from a position men no longer respect. They have already audited the responsibility ledger and found it unbalanced. Public discourse reflects this stalemate. Television panels debate declining birth rates with increasing urgency. Experts propose everything from tax restructuring to mandatory premarital counseling to cultural campaigns celebrating fatherhood. Audiences watch politely but remain unmoved because the proposed solutions address surface symptoms rather than core objections. Men tuning in hear the same rhetoric they rejected years earlier: provide more, sacrifice more, step up more, without acknowledgement that the relational environment has grown hostile to those very qualities. The disconnect fuels cynicism. Many men stop consuming mainstream media entirely, preferring independent creators who speak directly to their lived experience. Independent creators fill the gap with long form content that dissects relationship economics, exposes entitlement patterns, promotes male self development, and normalizes lifelong singlehood. Channels dedicated to financial independence attract millions of subscribers. Fitness influencers blend training advice with philosophical reflections on autonomy. Travel vloggers document solo journeys while subtly critiquing the coupled lifestyle. These creators rarely attack women directly. Instead, they focus on male empowerment and boundary setting. The tone remains calm, analytical, and solution oriented. Anger appears only when recounting personal betrayals or systemic biases. The overall message resonates because it validates without victimizing. Validation creates community that substitutes for romantic partnership. Men form local meetup groups under neutral banners: investing clubs, hiking societies, martial arts dojos, book clubs, entrepreneurship circles, where conversation flows freely without gender performance. These groups provide laughter, accountability, practical help during crises, and the simple comfort of being seen and understood by peers. The bonds formed often prove deeper and more durable than many romantic relationships because they rest on mutual respect rather than conditional attraction. When a member faces job loss, illness, or family tragedy, the group mobilizes without hesitation. The reliability of male solidarity contrasts sharply with the perceived unreliability of romantic partners. This solidarity extends online into private networks that operate beyond public moderation. Encrypted chats preserve unfiltered discussions of dating experiences, financial strategies, mental health tactics, and long term planning. Members share resources ranging from legal templates for asset protection to scripts for declining family pressure to workout programs designed for busy professionals. The networks function as mutual aid societies tailored to men navigating a society that still expects them to carry disproportionate burdens while offering diminishing rewards. As these networks grow, they influence broader culture in ways difficult to reverse. Language evolves. Terms once used pejoratively, simp, beta, provider, lose sting because men reclaim them ironically or discard them entirely. New vocabulary emerges to describe preferred states: sovereign, grounded, aligned, self directed. The lexicon reflects a shift from external conquest to internal mastery. Young men adopt the language naturally, signaling to each other that they belong to the same paradigm. The paradigm solidifies most clearly in attitudes toward fatherhood. Previous generations viewed children as inevitable milestones. Current cohorts treat parenthood as a deliberate, high stakes decision requiring aligned partnership, financial surplus, and emotional readiness. Without those preconditions, many conclude that childlessness represents the responsible choice. They cite environmental concerns, economic uncertainty, personal freedom, and the absence of trustworthy co parents as rational grounds for opting out. The decision carries no shame because it aligns with observed realities rather than inherited expectations. Women who desire children face narrowing windows and shrinking pools of willing partners. Some accelerate timelines by pursuing single motherhood through sperm donation or adoption. Others seek partners abroad where traditional gender expectations persist. A growing minority advocate openly for cultural course correction, arguing that mutual accountability offers the only viable path forward. Their voices gain traction among younger women who grew up watching the fallout and prefer prevention over cure. Yet even these reformist efforts struggle against the inertia of established patterns. Men, meanwhile, continue building lives that require no external permission. They renovate apartments to suit solitary comfort, curate minimalist wardrobes focused on function and quality, maintain strict sleep schedules, experiment with biohacking protocols, meditate daily, journal rigorously, and measure progress against personal benchmarks rather than social milestones. The lifestyle produces visible results, leaner physiques, sharper focus, greater financial security, deeper knowledge bases, richer friendships, and a palpable sense of agency. Observers who once pitied single men now quietly envy their composure and freedom. The envy hints at the deepest irony of the entire shift. By withdrawing en masse, men inadvertently raise their own market value among those who value reciprocity and respect. Yet, the bar remains so high and trust so depleted that few women clear it consistently. The result is a standoff likely to persist for decades. Society adjusts around the reality of widespread singlehood, smaller apartments, solo centric services, revised pension models, automation to offset labor shortages, while individuals on both sides navigate the consequences of choices made in an environment that no longer rewards traditional coupling. Men who pioneered the walkaway movement now enter their 40s with net worths that once seemed unattainable, bodies honed by years of uninterrupted training, minds sharpened by continuous learning, and social circles that provide genuine support. They look back at the path not taken and feel no regret. The experiment succeeded. Solitude delivered what partnership promised but rarely provided: peace, progress, and self respect. Having tasted that reality, they see no reason to trade it away. The quiet confidence that now defines so many men in their 30s and early 40s stems from years of accumulated evidence that the path they chose works. They have passed the point where doubt could creep back in. The initial months of disengagement felt experimental, almost defiant. Now the lifestyle has become ordinary, even boring in the best possible way. Mornings begin with coffee made exactly how they like it. No negotiation over strength or temperature. Workouts happen on their schedule, not squeezed between someone else's appointments. Evenings stretch open for reading, gaming, skill building, or simply staring at the ceiling while thoughts settle without interruption. The absence of constant micro adjustments creates mental bandwidth that feels luxurious after years of scarcity. This bandwidth fuels deeper pursuits that were once impossible under relational strain. Men who previously delayed learning guitar because practice time was consumed by dates now play with proficiency that surprises even themselves. Those who shelved plans to write code for personal projects now maintain open source repositories with hundreds of stars. Language learners reach conversational fluency in Japanese, Spanish, or German because immersion apps and tandem exchanges fit seamlessly into free hours. The progress compounds quietly but relentlessly. Each small mastery reinforces the decision. Resources directed inward yield visible returns, while resources directed outward once yielded mostly depletion. Depletion no longer registers as normal. Men recall the old state with clinical detachment. The way conversations drained rather than energized, the way compliments felt like currency that never bought lasting security, the way disagreements left lingering residue even after apologies. They compare that residue to the clean slate they maintain now. No lingering guilt over unmet expectations, no second guessing tone and messages, no mental inventory of upcoming birthdays, anniversaries, or preferred gifts. The cognitive overhead of relationship maintenance, once invisible because it was universal, now stands out in stark relief when they observe coupled friends. They see the same patterns repeating: subtle exhaustion, forced smiles, deferred personal goals, and feel gratitude rather than envy. Gratitude appears frequently in private reflections shared in trusted circles. Men describe waking up without dread, moving through days without performing, ending nights without debriefing someone else's emotions. The simplicity carries almost spiritual weight for some. They adopt routines that border on ritual: cold showers for discipline, journaling for clarity, weekly reviews of net worth and body composition for accountability, monthly solo dates to favorite restaurants where they order what they want and savor it slowly. These rituals are not performative. They are maintenance for a machine that finally runs without friction. Friction once defined so much of male experience in the dating sphere. Every approach carried rejection risk calibrated against social status. Every date carried financial risk calibrated against perceived entitlement. Every relationship carried emotional risk calibrated against asymmetrical investment. Removing all three variables simultaneously produces a liberation that is difficult to overstate. Men who spent their 20s calculating odds now live without constant probability assessments. The freedom from probabilistic thinking alone feels like shedding a heavy coat worn too long. Shedding extends to material possessions as well. Many downsize wardrobes to versatile, high quality pieces that require minimal decision fatigue. They purge items bought to impress, flashy watches, designer sneakers, statement jackets, and replace them with functional gear suited to actual hobbies. The purge is symbolic as much as practical. Letting go of objects acquired under old incentives signals completion of that chapter. What remains serves present priorities: hiking boots for weekend trails, noise canceling headphones for focused work, ergonomic chair for long coding sessions, quality mattress for restorative sleep. The home becomes a tool for optimization rather than a stage for signaling. Optimization mindset permeates finances with similar rigor. Men automate investments into broad market index funds, max out tax advantaged accounts, track expenses with precision, negotiate salaries annually, build emergency funds covering 18 months rather than 6. The goal is not early retirement in the extreme sense, but anti fragility, enough runway to weather layoffs, market crashes, health setbacks, or family crises without panic. When coupled men discuss financial stress, single men listen politely but internally note the difference. Dual incomes help, yet dual expenses, dual expectations, and dual decision making often cancel much of the advantage. Solo compounding at disciplined rates frequently outpaces shared but diluted growth. Growth extends beyond money into capability. Men invest in skills that increase optionality: cloud certifications, copywriting, video editing, negotiation training, public speaking, foreign language fluency, strength coaching credentials. Each skill functions as insurance against obsolescence and as leverage in future opportunities. The investment pays dividends quickly because learning happens without distraction. No need to pause a course because a partner feels neglected. No guilt over weekend seminars because someone else wants quality time. Progress arrives faster, confidence builds faster, income potential expands faster. The virtuous cycle reinforces itself. Women who attempt re entry into this world encounter men who have become selective to the point of near inaccessibility. A woman who once relied on beauty, education, or social proof to generate interest now finds those assets insufficient. The new gatekeepers demand evidence of character that cannot be faked in photos or bios. Consistency over time, humility in disagreement, generosity without scorekeeping, respect for male boundaries without resentment, reciprocity in effort and emotion. These traits, once assumed secondary to surface markers, now rank primary. Women who possess them stand out immediately and receive genuine attention. Women who lack them receive polite neutrality at best. The selectivity frustrates many women who feel they have already adjusted expectations downward. They point to willingness to work, split expenses, cook occasionally, or offer emotional support as proof of change. Yet men measure against past experience rather than promises. They remember when similar assurances preceded gradual escalation of demands. They remember when effort flowed one way until resentment built on both sides. Trust, once broken across thousands of individual stories, does not rebuild through declarations. It requires sustained demonstration that overrides historical patterns. Few women sustain that demonstration long enough to cross the threshold because the men they approach have already built fulfilling lives without needing to wait. Waiting has lost appeal. Men no longer postpone personal milestones for hypothetical partnership. They buy the apartment they want now. They book the solo trip they dreamed of now. They adopt the dog they always wanted now. They launch the side business they sketched years ago now. The present tense dominates decision making. Future oriented compromises that once felt noble now feel like self betrayal. The shift from deferred gratification to present maximization marks one of the deepest psychological changes. Psychological change shows in reduced reactivity. Men who once jumped at notifications now leave phones on silent for hours. They respond when convenient rather than instantly. Criticism that once triggered defensive spirals now elicits shrugs or calm clarification. Emotional volatility from others registers as data rather than threat. The detachment is not coldness, it is self soothing maturity earned through repeated exposure to patterns that never resolved. Having seen the cycle play out enough times, they exit the loop entirely. Exit feels permanent because reentry costs have grown prohibitive. Reacclimating to relational negotiation would require dismantling habits of autonomy that now feel essential. Unlearning boundary enforcement would feel like regression. Diverting resources from self development to couple maintenance would feel like squandering gains already locked in. The sunk cost fallacy works in reverse here. So much has been invested in independence that returning to dependence appears irrational. Irrationality defines much of the remaining discourse around relationships. Media continues portraying partnership as the pinnacle of human fulfillment. Advertisements sell couple centric experiences. Families still ask predictable questions at gatherings, yet men treat these inputs as background noise rather than directives. They nod, smile, change the subject, and continue living according to internal compass. The external world has not caught up to the internal shift, but that lag no longer bothers them. They have decoupled approval from behavior. Decoupling allows experimentation with lifestyles once considered fringe. Some embrace digital nomadism fully, basing themselves in low cost, high quality locations while working remotely. Others adopt van life within China, converting vehicles into mobile homes for weekend escapes or longer sabbaticals. Still others pursue monastic minimalism, Few possessions, strict routines, voluntary simplicity inspired by both Eastern philosophy and Western Stoicism. These paths share a common thread: deliberate design around personal sovereignty rather than accommodation of another person. Sovereignty produces unexpected side benefits. Social interactions improve because men no longer seek validation through them. Friendships deepen because energy flows freely without romantic distraction. Professional performance rises because focus sharpens. Physical appearance improves because self care becomes non negotiable. The halo effect of these improvements sometimes attracts interest from women who notice the change, yet the men remain largely unmoved. Interest alone no longer suffices. Alignment does. Alignment remains rare because it requires both parties to operate from similar premises: mutual respect as baseline, contribution as expectation, peace as priority. Most women still enter negotiations carrying assumptions shaped by different premises. The mismatch persists. Men continue choosing solitude over suboptimal alignment. The pattern hardens further with each passing year. Hardening suggests long term societal reconfiguration. Birth rates stabilize at levels far below replacement. Education systems adapt to smaller cohorts. Labor markets rely increasingly on automation and immigration. Pension models shift toward individual responsibility. Housing markets favor smaller units. Consumer industries pivot toward single person experiences. Cultural narratives slowly normalize lifelong singlehood as one valid path among many. Resistance fades as evidence accumulates that happiness does not require coupling. Men who led this change now mentor younger cohorts informally. They share frameworks rather than rules, audit costs honestly, enforce boundaries early, prioritize internal metrics, build escape velocity before commitment. The guidance spreads through word of mouth, group chats, meetups, anonymous forums. Each new adherent strengthens the network effect. The movement becomes self sustaining because it delivers results. Results speak louder than ideology. When a man in his late 30s shows up to a gathering looking rested, fit, financially secure, intellectually engaged, and genuinely content, younger men take note. When he describes his life without apology or defensiveness, the model gains credibility. When he declines to engage in traditional status games, the rejection itself becomes aspirational. The lifestyle sells itself through demonstration rather than argument. Demonstration continues quietly while society adjusts around it. The adjustment will take decades. In the meantime, men keep walking their chosen path, one deliberate step after another, toward lives built on their own terms. The momentum behind this lifestyle has now created its own gravitational pull that draws in men who were once on the fence. They see peers who walked away 5 or 10 years ago now, living with a level of composure and resource control that stands in sharp contrast to the stress etched on the faces of men still grinding through mismatched partnerships. The visual difference alone convinces many to test the waters of disengagement. They start small, canceling dating app subscriptions for a month, redirecting gift budgets into personal equipment, declining invitations to group dates that feel like performance reviews. The experiment usually lasts longer than planned because the immediate relief is undeniable. Energy returns, focus sharpens, savings accelerate, sleep deepens. The longer they stay out, the less incentive they have to dip back in. This gravitational effect operates most powerfully within tight knit professional circles. In tech parks, finance districts, creative agencies, and engineering firms across major cities, clusters of men quietly adopt the same playbook. They share spreadsheets tracking monthly burn rates versus investment returns. They trade notes on the most efficient meal prep services for solo households. They recommend apps that automate bill splitting on the rare occasions they do socialize with women, ensuring no one assumes the man will cover everything by default. These micro communities normalize behaviors that society at large still labels unconventional. Within the bubble, choosing solitude looks like the smart move, not the strange one. The normalization spreads through casual conversations that never mention dating directly. A colleague mentions buying a one bedroom condo in a walkable neighborhood and receiving nods of approval instead of questions about when he will need more space for a family. Another talks about scheduling a 3 week solo trek through Sichuan and gets logistical tips rather than concerned looks about finding someone to share the adventure. The absence of traditional probing signals acceptance. Over time, the group develops an unspoken code. Do not pressure anyone into relationship talk. Do not assume coupling is the goal. Do not frame singlehood as a phase to outgrow. The code protects the peace everyone has worked to establish. Protection of peace becomes almost sacred. Men guard it with the same vigilance they once applied to winning affection. They decline social obligations that carry even faint relational undertones. Wedding invitations where they would be seated at the singles table, family reunions heavy with matchmaking subtext, office parties where colleagues tried to play wingman. Declining comes easily now. Polite but firm phrasing has been rehearsed. Thank you for thinking of me. I have other commitments that weekend. I appreciate the invite, but I'm keeping things low key this year. No elaborate excuses. No guilt. The boundary holds because the cost of crossing it, re entering environments laced with expectation, feels higher than any temporary social awkwardness. Where awkwardness fades anyway as more men adopt the same stance. Weddings shrink in guest count because fewer single men feel obligated to attend. Family gatherings feature more empty chairs at the young adult table. Matchmaking aunts and uncles run out of candidates to introduce. The cultural machinery that once enforced pairing begins to sputter. It does not break dramatically, it simply runs out of fuel. Each man who quietly opts out removes one more cog from the machine. After enough cogs disappear, the mechanism stops turning smoothly. Pressure that used to feel universal now feels optional, almost quaint. Quaint describes the way many men now view traditional romantic gestures. Flowers on Valentine's Day, red envelopes during festivals, surprise weekend trips, expensive dinners to mark milestones. These once carried social weight. Now they register as relics from a different economy. Men who still participate do so ironically or for very specific women who have proven themselves exceptions over years. Most view the rituals as inefficient signaling. Why spend thousands to communicate interest when direct communication costs nothing and carries less risk of misinterpretation? The old language of courtship has lost translation value. Men speak a different dialect now. Consistency, respect, independence, reciprocity. Those who understand it receive attention, those who do not receive silence. Silence serves as communication in itself. When women message after months of no contact, expecting the old eagerness, they often receive delayed, neutral replies or nothing at all. The lack of response conveys the shift more clearly than any lecture could. Men no longer feel compelled to explain their absence. They assume women already know the reasons because the evidence surrounds them. Empty event seats, declining marriage numbers, viral stories of men thriving alone. Explanation would require re entering a conversation they have already closed. Most prefer to let the silence speak. Silence also protects mental real estate. Men reclaim hours once spent analyzing mixed signals, decoding subtext, anticipating needs. That mental real estate now hosts planning for certifications, market research for side ventures, strategy sessions for fitness goals, deep dives into philosophy or history podcasts. The reclaimed space fills with content that builds rather than drains. Knowledge compounds, skills sharpen, perspective widens. The man who once obsessed over why a date went cold now analyzes quarterly earnings reports or masters advanced deadlift programming. The trade feels uneven in the best possible way. Uneven trades define much of the old dynamic. Men gave time, money, emotional labor, status elevation, future security. Women gave intermittent affection, social proof, occasional domestic contribution, promise of family. The imbalance became unsustainable when the promise portion kept receding into the future while the giving portion remained immediate and ongoing. Men eventually audited the exchange and found it structurally unfair. Rather than renegotiate from weakness, they exited. Exit granted leverage they never had inside the system. By refusing to participate, they forced the market to confront its own terms. The market confronts those terms unevenly. Some women pivot hard, learning to initiate, covering their share without comment, showing vulnerability without weaponizing it, treating male hobbies as worthy of genuine curiosity rather than competition for attention. These women often find doors opening again, sometimes with men who had already sworn off dating entirely. The encounters feel different, slower, more deliberate, less scripted. Both sides approach with eyes wide open. Past damage lingers, so progress happens cautiously. When it works because both parties have already proven they can thrive alone. Partnership becomes additive rather than essential. Additive describes the healthiest remaining relationships. Neither person arrives desperate for rescue. Neither treats the other as validation source or financial backstop. Both maintain separate finances, separate social circles, separate long term plans that can coexist without merger. The arrangement resembles a long term alliance more than classic marriage. It suits men who have tasted full autonomy and refuse to relinquish it completely. It suits women who have confronted the limits of solo living and prefer collaboration to isolation. These pairings remain statistical outliers, but they point toward a possible future model if trust ever rebuilds at scale. Rebuilding at scale looks improbable in the current decade. Too many individual bridges have burned. Too many cautionary tales have been archived. Too many men have locked in habits of self sufficiency that feel superior to the alternative. Too many women still carry expectations shaped by a world that no longer exists. The gap between lived realities grows wider each year. Bridging it would require simultaneous cultural, economic, legal, and interpersonal resets. No institution has the authority or the will to orchestrate all four at once. Instead, society drifts toward parallel tracks. One track carries men who invest heavily in themselves, physically, financially, intellectually, socially, within same sex networks. The other carries women who pursue similar self investment or who seek partners outside the domestic cultural sphere. Crossovers happen rarely and only under strict conditions. Most people stay in their lane because it delivers more consistent returns than crossing over. Returns manifest in mundane but powerful ways. A man wakes up at 6, trains without distraction, eats breakfast he prepared exactly to his macros, works on high focus tasks during peak cognitive hours, advances a side project in the evening, connects with friends over a game or a meal, sleeps 8 hours without anxiety dreams. Repeat daily for years, and the compound effect produces a man who is healthier, wealthier, wiser, and calmer than his coupled counterpart of the same age and starting point. The difference becomes impossible to ignore when viewed side by side at reunions or industry conferences. The single man looks 10 years younger, moves with purpose, speaks with clarity, carries zero visible resentment. The coupled man often carries tension in the shoulders, fatigue in the eyes, a subtle deference that was not there in their 20s. The contrast fuels quiet conversations among men still on the fence. They ask how the single man did it. The answer comes back simple and consistent. Stopped playing a game where the rules kept changing to his disadvantage, redirected every resource to his own growth, accepted solitude as neutral rather than punitive, built a life that did not require external approval to feel complete. The explanation lands because it matches observable outcomes. Results trump rhetoric. Rhetoric continues in mainstream channels, articles lamenting the end of romance, experts warning of demographic collapse, influencers urging men to man up and women to soften their standards. Men consume less of it each year. They curate feeds that exclude the noise. Algorithms eventually serve them content aligned with their current reality. Solo travel vlogs, financial breakdowns, skill acquisition tutorials, philosophical reflections on autonomy. The information diet shifts permanently. What once felt urgent, finding a partner, now feels optional at best, counterproductive at worst. Counterproductive captures the view many men hold toward re engagement. They see partnership as a high variance bet with negative expected value under current conditions. The upside, companionship, children, shared memories, carries diminishing probability, while the downside, financial drain, emotional volatility, legal exposure, lost autonomy, carries high probability. Risk adjusted analysis favors staying out. Men who run these calculations no longer apologize for them. They treat the decision as rational portfolio management rather than moral failing. Moral framing has lost purchase anyway. Accusations of selfishness bounce off because men can point to their own flourishing as evidence that self prioritization benefits everyone around them. They show up as better friends, more reliable colleagues, calmer family members when they are not depleted by unequal dynamics. The old guilt narrative, real men sacrifice, has been replaced by a new one. Real men protect their capacity so they can give from strength rather than obligation. And giving from strength looks different. It might mean mentoring younger colleagues without expecting anything back. It might mean supporting parents financially without resentment. It might mean volunteering in community projects that align with personal values. The common thread is choice. No one extracts it. No one guilts it. No one assumes it. The absence of assumption restores dignity to the act of giving. Dignity restoration stands as one of the greatest unspoken wins of the entire shift. Men walk taller because their worth no longer depends on someone else's scorecard. They speak plainly because they no longer filter every word through potential disapproval. They set terms because they understand their own value chain. The internal alignment radiates outward as quiet authority. People notice. Respect follows. Respect, once sought through provision or performance, now arrives through presence. A man who knows his boundaries, honors his priorities, and declines to shrink himself commands attention without effort. Women who once dismissed average looking, average earning men now look twice at those who carry themselves with unapologetic self possession. The irony is thick. By ceasing to chase validation, men become more validating in the eyes of others. Yet most remain unmoved by the attention. They have already audited the cost benefit and found it lacking. The audit continues in private moments. Men periodically revisit the question: would I trade this piece for companionship if the terms were truly equal? The honest answer for most is still no. Not because they hate women, not because they fear intimacy, but because solitude has proven superior under real world conditions. The preference is not ideological, it is experiential. Experience trumps theory every time. Experience accumulates daily. Another sunrise watched alone from a favorite overlook. Another personal record lifted without fanfare. Another book finished at 3 in the morning because no one waits up. Another investment dividend posted without discussion of how it will fund a family. Another year of life lived on personal terms. Each day stacks another layer of evidence that the choice was correct. Correctness does not require universal agreement. Men no longer seek consensus. They seek coherence between their actions and their reality. Coherence feels like alignment, feels like freedom. Freedom, once feared as loneliness, now registers as home. The lifestyle has now crossed into a phase where it no longer requires justification to anyone, including the men living it. They have moved past defending the choice in online debates or family arguments. The phase of argument has ended because the results speak with such clarity that counter arguments lose traction the moment they are voiced. A man in his mid 30s who maintains peak physical condition, commands a salary well above the urban median, owns his residence outright, or carries a minimal mortgage, travels internationally several times a year on his own schedule, and maintains a circle of loyal friends who share his values, no longer feels the need to explain why he skipped the conventional timeline. Observers who once asked when he would settle down now ask how he managed to structure life so efficiently. The question itself has flipped from interrogation to curiosity. Curiosity replaces judgment in many professional and social settings. Colleagues notice the man who never complains about relationship stress, never borrows money for unexpected expenses tied to a partner, never shows up late or distracted because of domestic negotiations. They see him arrive rested after a weekend spent climbing mountains or coding a personal project to completion. They see him decline over time, not out of laziness, but because he has already optimized his income streams to require less grind. The pattern registers subconsciously. Younger employees start modeling small pieces of the behavior, saving aggressively, saying no to draining social obligations, prioritizing recovery over constant output. The influence spreads laterally rather than top down. No manifesto needed, demonstration suffices. Demonstration reaches its purest form in the way men handle adversity. When layoffs hit a department, the single men often weather the storm with greater composure. They have no dependents drawing down reserves. They have six-figure emergency funds built over years of redirected dating budgets. They have side income from freelance gigs or dividend portfolios that cushion the blow. They pivot faster because geographic flexibility remains intact. No spouse's career to coordinate, no children's schools to consider. The speed of recovery impresses even those who once viewed singlehood as instability. After watching a laid off colleague bounce back into a higher paying remote role within weeks while a married counterpart struggled for months under dual household pressure, the narrative shifts. Stability, it turns out, can look like independence rather than coupling. Independence also reshapes risk tolerance in career decisions. Men pursue entrepreneurial ventures that once seemed reckless under traditional obligations. They quit stable but soul crushing jobs to launch consultancies, open niche e commerce stores, develop apps, or move into content creation full time. The downside risk feels manageable when the only person affected is the one making the decision. Upside potential, therefore, receives full attention. Several years into this experiment, a noticeable subset of these ventures succeeds at levels that provide complete financial freedom. The men behind them do not flaunt wealth. They simply disappear from the 9 to 5 circuit, living quietly in smaller cities or abroad, while passive income covers modest but comfortable lifestyles. Their quiet exits add another layer of proof to the model. Autonomy compounds opportunity. Opportunity compounds differently for those who remain in corporate structures. They negotiate harder because they have no need to prove provider status to anyone. They walk away from toxic managers without hesitation because relocation or sabbaticals pose no relational complications. They demand remote work arrangements that maximize personal efficiency rather than office FaceTime. Companies adapt slowly but steadily. Flexible policies, once offered as perks for parents, now extend to high-performing individuals who simply value control over their hours. The men who pioneered this stance benefit first and most visibly. Their performance metrics rise while their stress metrics fall. The combination makes them indispensable in ways that traditional family men, stretched thinner, sometimes struggle to match. The stretch affects women in parallel corporate environments more acutely. Many who climbed ladders during their 20s now reach their 30s confronting the same workload without the dual income buffer they once assumed would arrive. Rent continues rising. Healthcare deductibles climb. Savings rates stagnate when lifestyle inflation fills the gap left by absent partnership contributions. The boss lady archetype that felt empowering at 25 begins to feel isolating at 35. Some women quietly envy the men who exited the game early and built fortress like personal finances. The envy rarely turns into open acknowledgement because it would require admitting the old script did not deliver as promised. Instead, it surfaces in private conversations among female friends. Questions about how certain men seem so unbothered by economic pressure. Observations that the happiest people in their network are often the unattached ones. Unattached happiness challenges deeply ingrained cultural programming. Media still sells coupling as the ultimate achievement. Holiday campaigns center on romantic pairs. Social feeds overflow with engagement announcements and baby milestones. Yet the men thriving outside that frame create cognitive dissonance. They are not miserable hermits. They are not bitter incels. They are functional, attractive, successful adults who simply chose a different operating system for life. The dissonance forces observers to grapple with an uncomfortable possibility. The conventional path may not be the optimal one for everyone, and perhaps not even for most in the current environment. Current environment includes economic headwinds that punish shared households more severely than solo ones. Inflation erodes purchasing power faster for couples maintaining two wardrobes, two social calendars, two sets of hobbies, two vacation preferences. Solo men streamline everything: single grocery runs, single streaming subscriptions, single gym memberships, single travel plans. The savings compound quietly but relentlessly. When a recessionary wave hits, the streamlined household weathers it with minimal disruption. The couple household often faces painful trade offs: cutting vacations, delaying home repairs, postponing career risks. The gap widens again. Observers notice more men choose streamlining before the next wave arrives. Streamlining extends to mental hygiene as well. Men maintain strict information diets that exclude drama driven content. They unfollow accounts that glorify toxic dynamics or shame male self prioritization. They curate feeds around mastery, resilience, humor, and practical wisdom. The mental environment stays clean. No daily dose of outrage over gender wars. No scrolling through highlight reels of other people's relationships. No exposure to narratives that frame single men as defective. The absence of poison allows clarity to flourish. Clarity produces better decisions. Better decisions produce better outcomes. The loop tightens. Tightening loops create momentum that younger cohorts inherit automatically. Boys born after 2005 grow up seeing uncles, older cousins, and online figures who never married yet appear fulfilled. They see no correlation between wedding rings and happiness. They see strong inverse correlation between autonomy and visible stress. The imprint happens early. By the time they reach dating age, partnership already looks like an elective course rather than a required one. They approach romantic interest with the same skepticism their predecessors developed through painful trial and error. The learning curve shortens dramatically. Fewer men need to crash before adopting protective strategies. Protective strategies now include preemptive financial separation, even in casual dating. Men insist on 50-50 splits from the first meeting. They use apps that track shared expenses transparently. They maintain separate residences indefinitely. They avoid commingling finances entirely. These boundaries once seemed extreme. Now they seem baseline prudence. Women who accept the terms immediately signal compatibility. Women who push back immediately disqualify themselves. The filter operates efficiently because men no longer invest time in persuasion. They let actions reveal intentions. Actions reveal intentions most starkly during economic stress tests. When a woman loses her job or faces unexpected medical costs, the response from a single man in her orbit often differs from what she might have expected under old norms. He offers advice, referrals, tactical support, resume reviews, networking introductions, budgeting templates, but rarely opens his wallet without clear reciprocity agreements. The shift surprises some women who grew up assuming male provision during hard times. Yet men view unconditional rescue as the very dynamic that once trapped them in unbalanced arrangements. They prefer enabling self sufficiency over creating dependency. The preference preserves dignity on both sides. Dignity preservation becomes a core value in male circles. Men speak openly about refusing to be anyone's backup plan, safety net, or emotional landfill. They reject the role of default problem solver for someone who never reciprocated support. The rejection no longer carries anger, it carries finality. Once stated, the boundary stands. Enforcement requires no drama, just consistent non participation in old patterns. Non participation reshapes public spaces over time. Bars, once packed with singles looking to mingle, now host more same sex groups or solitary readers. Dating events shrink or rebrand as friendship mixers. Matchmaking services pivot toward professional networking or hobby based gatherings. The romantic overlay thins. People meet organically through shared interests rather than engineered scarcity. The change feels subtle year to year, but profound in aggregate. The air in mixed gender environments loses the old undercurrent of evaluation and pursuit. Interactions relax into neutrality. Neutrality allows friendships across gender lines that were once impossible under courtship pressure. Men and women now maintain platonic connections without suspicion or expectation. The absence of agenda creates space for genuine camaraderie. These friendships often prove more durable than romantic ones because they rest on mutual utility rather than hormonal chemistry. Men value women who bring sharp insights, humor, professional connections, or creative perspectives without demanding emotional labor or financial support. Women value men who offer straightforward advice, reliability, and absence of hidden motives. The model works because neither side arrives carrying entitlement. Entitlement erosion marks one of the deepest shifts. Men have shed the belief that they owe provision in exchange for existence. Women increasingly confront the reality that provision is no longer automatic. Both realizations force adaptation. Some adapt constructively, building independent security, cultivating reciprocity, prioritizing character over status. Others resist, doubling down on old expectations and finding the market unresponsive. Resistance produces frustration that vents in online spaces, but rarely changes outcomes on the ground. Outcomes on the ground favor those who adapted fastest. Men who walked away earliest now enjoy the highest compound returns: financial, physical, psychological. They mentor informally by example rather than instruction. Younger men watch and imitate. The transmission accelerates. Within another decade, the proportion of men opting out may cross a threshold where society must reorganize core institutions around singlehood as norm rather than deviation. Reorganization has already begun in small ways. Insurance products tailored to single households proliferate. Travel companies market solo packages without stigma. Real estate developers build more micro units with premium amenities. Consumer brands target individual indulgence rather than couple gifting. The economy slowly tilts towards serving autonomous adults. The tilt will steepen as numbers grow. Numbers grow because the alternative has lost credibility. Partnership once promised security, love, legacy. It delivered conditional affection, escalating demands, statistical probability of dissolution. Men ran the numbers and chose the surer bet. The bet paid off. Payoff creates momentum. Momentum creates inevitability. Inevitability does not mean joylessness. Men report higher baseline contentment than at any previous life stage. They laugh more easily. They take risks more boldly. They connect more authentically within chosen circles. Life feels expansive rather than constrained. The absence of relational friction allows full expression of personality, ambition, curiosity. Fulfillment arrives through accumulation of small sovereign moments rather than one grand romantic narrative. Grand narratives still exist. They just center on personal legacy rather than familial dynasty. A man builds a body of work, open source libraries, published articles, patented innovations, mentorship networks, financial independence that frees him to give generously on his terms. The legacy carries no surname requirement. It requires only consistent action over decades. Action flows freely when no one else's approval gates it. Approval gates have been dismantled. Men approve themselves through measurable progress. The internal scorecard replaces the external one. Calibration feels liberating. Calibration produces consistency. Consistency produces mastery. Mastery produces peace. The trajectory of this movement has solidified into something irreversible. Not because men declared war on relationships, but because they discovered a superior equilibrium state. The equilibrium favors clarity over compromise, ownership over obligation, and measured progress over performative pursuit. Once achieved, it becomes self reinforcing. Every additional year spent in this state raises the psychological and practical cost of returning to the previous model. The bar for reentry keeps climbing because the baseline quality of life keeps rising. Men do not miss what they once chased. They look back at it the way someone who quit smoking looks at old cigarette packs, with detached recognition of how much better breathing feels without them. Breathing easier translates into sharper decision making across domains. Career choices become bolder, yet more calculated. A man who once hesitated to negotiate a raise because he feared instability now demands what his market value dictates without apology. He knows the worst case scenario no longer threatens his entire household structure. The absence of dependence grants him leverage that married colleagues can only envy in silence. Promotions follow faster for those who can afford to take calculated risks. Risk taking compounds into higher earnings, which compound into greater freedom, which compounds into even lower tolerance for any arrangement that threatens that freedom. The cycle locks in. Locked in cycles produce visible divergence over time. At industry conferences, the men who present with calm authority, lean physiques, clear eyes, and zero visible burnout often turn out to be the ones who never married or divorced early and never remarried. Their counterparts who stayed in traditional arrangements frequently show the wear, slight stoop from chronic tension, distracted glances at phones checking family logistics, fatigue that no amount of coffee fully erases. The contrast no longer requires commentary, it simply exists as data. Younger attendees absorb the data without being told. They pattern match toward the calmer, sharper profile because it delivers observable advantages. Observable advantages extend into health span metrics that matter more with age. Men who avoided decades of low grade relational cortisol now show biomarkers that physicians describe as enviable: optimal fasting insulin, robust HDL to LDL ratios, high VO2 max, low resting heart rate, balanced inflammatory markers. They age slower on the inside, even if the calendar marches forward. Sleep remains deep and uninterrupted. Recovery from training happens quickly. Cognitive sharpness holds steady through long workdays. The body responds to consistent care without the interference of emotional turbulence or neglected self maintenance. The difference accumulates quietly but inexorably. By 50, the gap between those who stayed single and those who did not often looks like 10 to 15 years of biological age. Biological age matters because men now plan for longevity rather than legacy through offspring. They structure finances assuming they will live actively into their 80s or 90s. Investment horizons stretch longer. Health protocols become non negotiable. Preventive screenings happen on schedule. Strength training continues because mobility in old age trumps everything else. The mindset shifts from provide for a family to build a fortress that sustains me through decades of independence. The fortress includes diversified income, paid off assets, strong networks, portable skills, and physical resilience. It stands because nothing was diverted to support another person's lifestyle or expectations. Expectations that once defined male worth have been replaced by internal standards. Worth no longer hinges on being chosen, on providing lavishly, on fathering children, on hosting perfect holidays. It hinges on discipline shown in private moments, showing up to the gym at 5 a.m. when motivation is zero, sticking to a reading list when distractions beckon, maintaining composure when old triggers appear in family conversations, directing generosity only where it is genuinely reciprocated. These private victories accumulate into a self concept that feels unbreakable. External validation becomes optional noise. Noise reduction reaches its peak in how men handle criticism or nostalgia from others. When relatives lament the lack of grandchildren, the response is calm acknowledgement followed by redirection. I'm happy with how things are going. No defensiveness, no elaborate justification. When friends post wedding photos or announce pregnancies, congratulations are sincere but brief. No envy, no comparison. The emotional ledger stays clean because the alternative path was never framed as failure. It was framed as preference backed by evidence. Evidence continues to mount in everyday arenas. Grocery stores see more men shopping efficiently for one, selecting high protein items, seasonal produce, and minimal processed foods. Coffee shops host more solitary workers with laptops open to spreadsheets or code editors rather than couples sharing earbuds. Gyms fill with men training alone or in small male groups focused on progressive overload rather than impressing anyone nearby. Parks fill with solo runners logging miles at dawn, headphones in, mind clear. The landscape of urban life slowly reorganizes around individuals who prioritize their own systems over shared ones. Shared systems once dominated social planning. Weekend brunches, group vacations, holiday parties, double dates, all assumed coupling as default. Now invitations arrive with less frequency or carry disclaimers. No pressure if you're not into couple stuff. Men decline most without guilt. They prefer smaller gatherings with people who respect their autonomy. They host when it suits them, on their terms, with clear start and end times. Social energy gets rationed toward connections that recharge rather than drain. The rationing produces deeper but fewer relationships, mostly with other men who operate under the same principles. Principles include radical accountability to self. Men track metrics obsessively. Net worth monthly, body fat quarterly, books read annually, new skills mastered per year, days traveled abroad, hours in deep focus per week. The tracking is not obsessive in a neurotic sense, it is systematic in an engineering sense. Data informs adjustments. Adjustments produce better data. Better data reinforces confidence. Confidence eliminates second guessing. The absence of second guessing frees even more bandwidth for creation and enjoyment. Enjoyment takes forms that were once deferred. A man buys the high end road bike he always wanted and rides centuries on weekends. Another builds a home studio and records music for his own satisfaction. A third learns classical guitar and plays Bach suites in empty apartments. A fourth restores vintage motorcycles in a rented garage. These pursuits carry no deadline, no audience requirement, no partner approval needed. They exist because the man wants them to exist. The intrinsic reward outweighs any external metric. External metrics still matter in professional spheres, but they serve the man rather than the other way around. He pursues raises, equity grants, speaking engagements, board seats, patents, publications because they increase his optionality, not because they make him more marriageable. The decoupling of ambition from romantic viability creates purer drive. Drive without ulterior motive produces higher quality output. Higher quality output attracts opportunities that further expand freedom. The loop spins upward. Upward spin contrasts sharply with the stagnation many coupled men report in their 30s and 40s. Careers plateau because energy gets diverted. Health slips because self care gets deprioritized. Friendships thin because time gets allocated elsewhere. The slow erosion happens so gradually that it feels normal until a single peer shows up looking 10 years younger and financially untouchable. The contrast prompts private reflection that rarely turns into action. Most stay in the known path because change feels riskier than continuation, even when evidence suggests otherwise. Evidence suggests otherwise most forcefully in longevity projections. Actuaries and financial planners now routinely model solo scenarios as the base case for many clients. They factor in higher savings rates, lower lifestyle inflation, reduced healthcare drag from stress related conditions, longer working capability due to better health. The models show single men reaching financial independence earlier and sustaining it longer. The projections no longer surprise advisors, they have become standard. Clients nod and keep building. Building continues without fanfare. A man in Shanghai quietly accumulates enough in index funds to cover modest living expenses indefinitely. Another in Shenzhen pays cash for a small apartment and invests the rest in dividend aristocrats. A third in Beijing scales a remote consulting practice until it runs on autopilot. Each milestone arrives without announcement. The men do not post about it, they simply live it. Living it quietly influences those around them more than any viral post could. Influence operates on the principle of visible proof over verbal persuasion. When a man walks into a room carrying himself with relaxed authority, when he speaks without seeking approval, when he declines invitations without apology, when he maintains composure under pressure, the message lands subliminally. Younger men feel the pull toward that state. They begin copying fragments, skipping unnecessary social events, automating investments, prioritizing sleep, enforcing boundaries in casual interactions. Fragments combine into habits. Habits combine into lifestyles. Lifestyles combine into culture. Culture shifts incrementally. Language adapts. Phrases like, I'm good on my own, lose defensive tone and gain neutral confidence. Terms like self first replace older pejoratives. Concepts like walk away wealth enter casual conversation among professionals. The lexicon reflects a worldview where autonomy ranks above affiliation. Affiliation remains possible, but only when it enhances rather than compromises the core structure. Core structure proves remarkably resilient. It withstands family pressure, media narratives, policy incentives, economic downturns, biological clocks, loneliness spikes, societal judgment. Each challenge arrives, gets evaluated against current reality, and gets dismissed because the alternative has already proven inferior. The dismissal happens faster each time. Immunity strengthens. Immunity allows men to engage with the world on their terms. They attend weddings without bitterness. They celebrate friends' children without envy. They mentor younger colleagues without expecting loyalty. They donate to causes they value without needing recognition. They travel to places that interest them without compromise. They pursue passions that fulfill them without justification. The freedom feels ordinary because it has become ordinary. Ordinary freedom produces a quiet revolution. No marches, no manifestos, no leaders, just millions of individual decisions aligning toward the same outcome. Lives built around self respect rather than external expectation. The revolution succeeds because it requires no coordination. Each man acts in his own interest, and the aggregate effect reshapes everything around him. Reshaping includes economic flows. Consumer spending tilts toward durable goods for one, experiences for one, investments for one. Real estate developers pivot to smaller, smarter units. Retail adapts to individual indulgence. Service industries grow around solo convenience, meal prep for one, personal training for one, travel planning for one. The market follows money and money follows preference. Preference settles on sovereignty. Sovereignty delivers peace. Peace delivers clarity. Clarity delivers better choices. Better choices deliver more sovereignty. The loop closes on itself, elegant and unbreakable. Men living inside this loop no longer wonder if they made the right call. They know. They see the evidence every morning when they wake up rested, every evening when they close the day on their terms, every quarter when net worth ticks higher, every year when health markers improve. The evidence accumulates without cease. Doubt evaporates long ago. What remains is forward motion, calm, deliberate, unhurried. The path ahead looks clear because it was built by the man walking it. No one else's map applies. No one else's timeline matters. The journey belongs to him alone, and that ownership feels like the ultimate victory. The 1 hour gang, you made it to the very end of this marathon breakdown. Massive respect for staying locked in through every layer. If these angry guy deep dives have been hitting hard and giving you the unfiltered truth you came for, show some support by grabbing me a Red Bull using the link in the description. What did you think about everything laid out here? Do you agree this shift is permanent, or do you see cracks forming somewhere that could pull men back? Drop your honest take in the comments and let's keep the conversation going. Like the video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.